What's up, Ego Hackers, and welcome to Season 40, Episode 10, as part of the How to Type Yourself 2.0 course. And this is when we start to get into the meat of things. So a little bit of history of Type Grid 5. We had Type Grid 3 listed on our companion guide, and that's been pretty cool. The problem is that it was ultimately incomplete. I had already stated things like initiating versus responding could no longer be reliably used for introversion and extroversion. It's actually about being explosive or implosive, etc. And also the type grid 3 did not account for gender. And we went through type grid 4, we went through type grid 4.5 until finally we came up with type grid 5, which is actually scarily accurate. And it is based on going all the way back to basics with Carl Jung and his original teaching on cognitive senses. And the original cognitive senses are based on the NTFS model, like the file system for Microsoft. I'm just kidding. That is intuition, thinking, feeling, and sensing. NTFS, those are the four cognitive senses according to Carl Jung. And there's two aspects to the type grid 5. That is octograms, which you can't even bother to identify someone's type, which is based on cognitive senses, and something we're calling cognitive realms, also known as the realms. And these are the realms right here. Notice from a Myers-Briggs type indicator perspective, we have J versus P. These are the J versus P realms. These are the T versus F realms. Which, by the way, note J versus P is not currently in the first alpha version of the test. The next version will be adding in these realms as part of the assessment. We are still implementing this piece. We had to have a discussion earlier today about how we're going to go about doing it, and we came up with a plan, so I'll be implementing that very soon since I'm the one writing the logic for it. And then we have T versus F right here. We have S versus N and E versus I. And each of these all are cognitive senses, or at least these are cognitive senses right here. N, T, F, S, right? Now, what's important to note is that J versus P is how your actual personality, which is contained in your middle two letters. So, like for example, let's do like an INTJ, right? The master race, INTJ. Here they go, the INTJs. So their actual personality is actually contained right here, right? And this is how they this is the fuel that they use for the personality, which is the first letter. And the last letter is how the personality is ultimately expressed, okay? Now, many of you right now are going like, OMG, Chase is going back to the letter dichotomies of the MBTI. And it's like, yes, absolutely I am. Because the MBTI letter dichotomies were actually based on Jung's NTFS model, which is about cognitive senses, okay? So that's what this is actually about. So first letter is a person's fuel or energy. The middle two letters is actually their persona. It's where their personality actually exists. It's where the self is. And then how their self is expressed is through J versus P, okay? And we're going to get in hella deep on cognitive functions much later. Don't get me wrong. But that's how this all works, okay? So you have a set of four realms per letter dichotomy, right? And each of these letters are competing for that slot, basically, when it comes to determining someone's psychological type. That's literally how it works. It's really simple. It's really easy and very, very useful, okay? So that's where that comes in, and that's how it works. But here's the problem. Again, you cannot determine a personality, which being able to identify which of these letters you are in each of these slots, you can't even determine any of this until you first have this, which is octogram. Octogram is critical. Again, remember, octogram represents a person's nurture, right? And realms represent someone's nature, okay? That's what they represent. And this is absolutely critical. So from an octogram's perspective, there are actually 8 total octograms. Now, we moved from the 4 octogram model to the 8, basically. Even though it's still, I guess, because it's 4, because you have UDSF people, You have UDUF people, SDUF people, and SDSF people right here. So those were the original 4 octogram variants. But the thing is that when you add in gender, and you understand real quick that octogram is actually separated between someone who's taking a perception role versus a judgment role, especially in a relationship. So you have the cognitive development, which is the first 2 letters indicated here, and then which if they're taking a judging or perceiving role right here, and this stands for whether or not they are a male or a female, basically. And these are the actual 8 octograms, okay? We are going to be utilizing this naming scheme from now on. This is octogram 4, this is octogram 3, so we are basically done with this. We are moving on. We don't care about this anymore. It's over. This is the new naming scheme, okay? Very, very important. Now, in terms of how society is now, as near as we can tell, based on preliminary observation, is that subconscious developed people are way more common than unconscious developed people, at least within the West, okay? They are a lot more common psychologically. So these are way more common, and these are not as common, okay? Again, what creates an SDPM person? This is a man, or what creates a subconscious developed man, basically. So SDPM or SDJM, that is a man who was expected to basically be supportive to his family growing up and had a lot of family around him, essentially. And being supportive of his family, right, in such a way where it was about community. It is the community mindset. In women, however, subconscious development in women is actually built as a result of isolation, okay? So girls who are isolated as children end up being way more expressive, and because they're more expressive, they become subconscious developed, right? Versus SD men, they end up being less expressive, also known as being implosive, right? And the reason why is because they've had to focus on the family members more so than themselves, versus subconscious developed women ended up having to be more focused on themselves than other people. It's all about isolation versus community. The same goes also for the UD people, okay? And in isolation, let's see here, the men end up becoming unconscious developed as a result of isolation, right? Versus women become unconscious developed if they are put in the community role. This is like the daughter who has to take care of her parents or her grandmother or something, and she's got to go get a job and produce and help, etc. That creates unconscious development in a child. There's different family roles within a dysfunctional family, and one of those roles is being like the parentified child. So if you're a woman and you become the parentified child, I recommend looking up what parentified child means. It's basically parenting your parents, right? That is a sense of community that is foisted upon a girl, basically, and she becomes unconscious developed. Versus with boys, they become unconscious developed through isolation, okay? And then they end up becoming more expressive as a result. Whereas the girls are not as expressive because they're having to deal with the drama and the inner workings of the family for the sake of fitting in. Octogram is entirely based on how you as a child were trying to fit in to your environment, okay? And that's what determines your octogram. That's why it's known as nurture. And then once we have successfully identified a person's nurture, at that point, then we can understand a person's nature, because these are all modifiers. These things modify what is actually happening in a person's persona. They have nature, but that nature is directly impacted by how they are nurtured as a child, such that then they become one of these 4 realms, basically, and take on the aspects of these realms. And there is a pattern, and you can't just, depending on your octogram here, it determines which of these are actually available to a person as well. And then obviously you have to consider soft locking and how that might change cognitive focus and how a person's realms may actually change in the moment from their default state to what we call their environmental state. We'll be discussing default state versus environmental state much later. It's going to be put into the Octagram 4.1 lectures section of the classroom on school. It will not be discussed as part of the How to Type Yourself 2.0 course for Season 40. That's probably going to be like Season 41, for example. But yes, but in general, these are the inner workings of the Type Grid 5, and it's all based on the NTFS model of cognitive senses, right? This is what it is, and this is what we've been working on for the better part of a year. And it's been a crazy road. Many rewrites, much research, much logicking ourselves to death, and then trying to like prove everything wrong or prove everything right. It's just been pure insanity with the Brain Trust team. But we were actually able to get to this point. So once you know the octagram, basically the process is simple. Identify your octagram first, figure out which of these are available to you, and then pick which of these you are. And depending on which one you are will determine which J versus P, T versus F, S versus N, E versus I you actually are. That is, in general, how the Type Grid 5 works. The problem is that when people are taking the assessment, they don't know what any of this means. They just don't know what it means. And they are oftentimes, they don't know which of these comes off to other people versus how they're coming off to themselves. And this is what creates mistyping as a result of using a personality test and assessments. So we've created this course, this particular season, to help you to understand exactly how you can utilize the test in the most